All right, so today we're going to talk about argument. We're going to get right into it so I can get through it and get things organized the way they need to be organized. And then once we get through this, then I'm going to take a break. I'll take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we can have our regular conversations about what's going on in the world and that kind of stuff. But I got to get this done first so I can work on that video and whatnot this afternoon. So, all right. So here's what we're working with. We're working with argument, right? So we're going to work through some questions, some things that I moved. By the way, I moved my whole office around, so now my screens are over here instead of way up here. So you'll see me look in different directions now. I moved everything around. So this is what we're going to be working with right here. We're going to be working with what is argument. I'm going to blow this up a little bit so it's a little easier to see on the screen. We're going to be working with what is argument, what is academic argument, what's the problem with people, or the old adage of people are entitled to their own opinions. And then we're going to look at classical argument, Rogerian argument, Tolman Argument, and then rhetoric, exigency, and then what are the tenets of strong arguments. So that's what we're going to be working with. So if you got any questions along the way, please jump in and just throw them at me, because it's just going to be helpful for the people who watch the video later. Okay, so first of all, what is argument, right? We use the term argument. It's a misnomer. Argument is not "you're a sack of motherfuckers" and that kind of stuff. That's not argument. That's fighting, right? That's that's a battle between people trying to get their way. Argument, by definition, is the act of asserting, supporting, and defending a claim. Okay? That's what it is. Okay? It's an intellectual, not an intellectual. It's an intellectual and social process. If it's a social process, right? Let me do this real quick. Okay, I'm going to put a hanging indent on this. If it's a social process, there are some examples that we can look at that are social arguments, right? So social arguments are good Lord, I can't type today. Social arguments are advertisements or advertisements, depending upon where you are in the world and which brand of English you speak. Songs, posters, stories, movies, television series, books, even though most people don't read them anymore. Books are always a social argument as well. Okay, so those are some examples of social arguments. Right. Notice what's not on there is social media. Right. Social media, it's not a social argument. It's akin to I'mRight.com. That's really what that is. It's people just, the more you like shit, the more shit you see that's like that shit you liked. So it's confirmation bias is what it is. And I posted something about that yesterday on my Instagram about the internet being the ultimate in confirmation bias, and that when we like things, we just end up seeing more things that we like, because I say this a lot. Anything that's pleasing to the eye is considered pornography. So when I talk about pornography, I'm not talking about sex. I'm not talking about porn videos and that kind of stuff. What I talk about when I talk about pornography is anything that's pleasing to the eye, anything that's captivating is considered pornography. That is a strict definition of it, right? So food can be pornography to some people. For me, it's motorcycles and cars. I fucking love them, right? Motorcycles to me are art that can kill you, and I love them. Some people it's guns. Some people it's wood, like wood furniture, right? All of those things that are pleasing are pornographic, right? Because they elicit that same kind of response to us. They activate the pleasure centers of the brain. So social media becomes pornographic because the more you like things, the more things like that you see, and therefore we keep scrolling because it's pleasing to us. It activates our pleasure centers. So social media is not a social argument. It is it's a social enterprise. People are making shit tons of money on it, and the more they can keep you engaged, the more money they make. But it's really not a social argument at all. Okay. So, what's the difference between a regular argument and an academic argument? Well, an academic argument, these are designed to make others, let me learn how to type again, others see the wisdom of a position or perspective and take action. Whatever that action is, right? Doesn't matter what it is. If you want people to read a book, right? You give them a compelling reason to do it. You're making an academic argument. If you want someone to go see a film, or if you want someone to begin exercising, or maybe stop eating food that's bad for them, you have to make an academic argument. Those are that you have to look at them and let people see the wisdom behind it, and not just, I want you to do this. You have to give them facts and things like that. Without facts, without the backing of information, it just becomes your opinion. When people tell me all the time that I should eat more green leafy vegetables because they're good for me. Okay, but they taste bad. I don't like them, so I don't eat them. Right? I'll take a multivitamin instead. And people are like, well, that's not a good substitute. Then why did they make the substitute? And they can't answer the question. So, all right. So, is a multivitamin as good as eating those things? No, but it is a viable substitute, right? So it's a thing you want people to do. You want them to take an action, right? That kind of stuff. You want them to see the wisdom in whatever it is, right? The process of making an academic argument, right? It begins. It means I like to put some cheese on your broccoli. No, exactly. What Librarian Wizard said, right? What Amy said, that means you like cheese. I've tried broccoli every way you can fix it, and I hate it. If you put cheese on it, it just fucks up cheese. Okay, I like cheese. It's just broccoli's. I can't stand the smell of it when it cooks. Rentals from the bookstore. Textbook rentals are extended, as far as I know. I thought I had an email about that. Let me make sure. Let me answer that definitively. I think I have it. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a. I don't know who it came from. That's the problem. I don't know who it came from. But I think there's an email about it. Those things should be extended. So they added the 15 grace period. Okay, so you have until May 26th. Okay, thank you, Amy. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I have it somewhere. It's just probably not accessible via my phone because it only loads so many emails at a time. All right. So we have these two things, right? We have argument, right, and then we have academic argument. So what's the problem with the old adage of people are entitled to their own opinions? Right? Here's the problem. The main problem is this, that we have entered into a place in our society where people's opinions are often viewed the same as facts, and they're not equal. They're not. The fact that my opinion that broccoli smells like feet is irrelevant when taken into consideration the facts that broccoli has a nutritional value and it has a benefit to the human body. Those two things are not equal. Okay, they're simply not. So when someone says, "Well, I think the president has done a good job as president," there are no facts to support that opinion. They don't exist. So you can have that opinion, but you have no support for it, and therefore an opinion is just something the way we see the world, right? The deal with this, the problem with these adages is this, right? They are set in stone. Okay? People's opinions are their opinions, and you're not going to change their opinion, right? So I don't argue with people about our current president. I don't argue with them about them anymore. If somebody has something to say about it, I just go, and walk away, because that person, right, is not going to hear anything I say. They're immune to facts. That's how I put it. They're immune to facts, right? Because they don't care, right? So I just don't worry about it, right? They are oversimplified. Okay? Opinions are oversimplified. Okay? That's why they're indefensible. It's because they're oversimplified. Okay? Opinions are also dismissive. Oops. Right? The phrase, people are entitled to their own opinion, is dismissive in its nature. It basically says it doesn't matter what you say, they're entitled to think whatever they want. Okay, and they are. And I am entitled not to engage with that person. I'm entitled not to talk to that person. I'm entitled not to value anything that person has to say. Pretty easy, right? I can just walk away, okay? It's not that big a deal, right? The phrase itself ignores progress, okay? It looks at, you're entitled to your own opinion. Doesn't matter what we now know. Doesn't matter that progress has taught us some new things, right? It's like if you've ever talked to your grandparents and they have some racist point of views, people say, well, they're entitled to their own opinion. Are they? No, it ignores progress, right? It simply says that I can freeze myself right here in 1956 and I don't have to see the world any other way, right? That's what my grandmother did, and that's why I'm glad she's gone. That's why I'm glad she died. I was happy when that woman died because the world is better off without people like her in it. And that may sound cold and it may sound cruel to people, but that's the truth of it. The world is better off without racists in it, and my grandmother was an absolute racist, right? We didn't need her anymore. We didn't need her to begin with, but we had a lot of them, a lot of people like her. And so when she died, I was like, it's good. I took my mother to her funeral like a good son would do, right? But I was really there just to make sure she was dead. And while that preacher was sitting up there going, Alice is sitting at the right hand of God, I was like, motherfucker, you didn't know this woman. If she gets into heaven, fuck, I'm safe. There's nothing I can do, right, that's ever going to keep me out. right? So that's why the phrase "everybody's entitled to their own opinions" doesn't work out a lot, right? That's why it ignores progress, because it's a matter of you can have your opinions, right? But your opinion should shift when new facts are presented, when new information is gained, right? And it basically says what other people think. Oops. It doesn't matter to me. It is a closed-minded position. So when people say, "Well, you're entitled to your own opinion," no, I have facts. It's So you have unsubstantiated opinions, and then you have substantiated opinions, right? Substantiated opinions are ones that we can back things up with facts. We can look up things and we can say, no, here's what happened, and here's when it happened, and here's why it happened. Other people are just like, well, that's just your opinion, right? It's the same thing with the word theory. People, that's just a theory. Well, a theory means it has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and we hold it to be scientifically accurate until new evidence is gained that disproves the theory, right? Gravity's a theory. If you think a theory is not proven and tested, go walk off a building and see how that works for you, right? When they really mean hypothesis, right? Hypothesis is an untested idea, right? But people are lazy and they don't want to learn things like that. So, as Dunning said, I always ask when people say with his right hand, "Do you want which hand to wait with?" Yeah, it's a silly statement, right? So that's the issue with people when they want to talk about argument. They want to talk about what they really want to talk about is fighting, right? I don't fight with people. I will have a debate with you. I'll have an argument with you in this sense, but I will not fight with anybody, especially not over the internet. Not going to happen, right? Not going to happen. So, just a waste of time. So if somebody comes to my Instagram page and they blah, 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 they're bullshit, I just immediately block them because I don't care. I really don't. If you don't like what I say, don't come back to my page, but don't report me and don't do shit like that, because that's just chicken shit, So just do what I do. I read some shit that I don't agree with, I scroll right on past it, right? I don't have to engage with everything. I don't. All right, so we're going to look at classical argument, right? Classical argument is kind of what everybody goes back to within academia. They want you to engage with classical argument. Well, we can't really do that because classical argument it was founded. Let me see. I don't want to bold it. It was founded in ancient Greece and Rome, and so they kind of built the foundations of classical argument, right? There's a couple of different classes for it. There's Aristotelian argument. Good Lord, learn how to spell, dummy. Aristotelian argument. So, Aristotelian argument works from this idea of fact. Where's the thing I'm looking for? There it is. Moves to a claim. From that claim, right? Oops. Let me back up. So, value then determines worth. Then we have a policy, and then we move into what can be done. So this is the way Aristotelian argument works, right? We have a fact that moves to a claim, right? We have value that then moves into tell me what it's worth, right? If this is what our value is, right, then what is that thing worth? Society, within society, right? If you don't have a cup and I have a cup, right? Or let's say I have 2 cups and you have 0, right? How much is that cup worth to you, right? So this is where we begin to have the argument about worth and value, right? Policies then become, what can we do? What can be done? What are we allowed to do? And so Aristotelian argument begins to move through these things, right? It works off of what are called proofs. So we have the 3 proofs are evidence, examples, and appeals. Okay? Oops. Good Lord. You'd think I'd learn how to do that. These support what our claims are. Okay? So, within composition, what we look at is this is kind of how we build classic essays and arguments within academia. This is how we teach you to do it in the beginning, and then we teach you more complex ways to do it, right? So we have a claim, then we find examples or evidence for that claim, and then what are the appeals to it, right? Appeals to authority. This is not appeals like, hey, we're going to change something. This is appeal to. Let's do this. So these are appeals to ethos, logos, and pathos, right? That's what we're talking about. Appeals to ethics, appeals to logic, appeals to emotions. Okay, not mentos. No, those don't work. All right. So those are our appeals, right? So that's what we've got to look at, right? So classical argument is viewed as an art form. And this is where it becomes a problem within academia. It's viewed as an art form because they look at it as a delicate process of connecting a topic to people's beliefs, good Lord, and emotions. And that's the classical viewpoint, right? That's the classical viewpoint. Now, in modern academia, right, we work from this beginning piece of Aristotelian logic and Aristotelian argument, where we say we want you to build an argument based off a claim, right? Then go and find evidence and examples, support for it, make an appeal, right? That's so those of you in my 102 class, that midterm essay, the mistress essay, is a classic Aristotelian argument, right? I want you guys to make an appeal. You can persuade people, you can inform people, you can argue, you can do whatever you want to do. You make an appeal to one of those things. Now, the research project, the longer paper of the two, is based upon an appeal to logic, period, right? There's no emotion, there's none of that. It has to be based upon facts. It has to be based off defensible claims that you have evidence for, and your conclusion has to be driven by the evidence you presented. You don't get to just make up some shit and go blah blah, right? So the facts have to support the conclusion. You're making a case for something. You're trying to defend a position, right? That's the difference between the two assignments, right? So it's viewed as an art form, and this is where it becomes the problem, right? Is people think that writing is an art form when there's actually more science to it than people think there is, right? But classical argument is an art form, right? You're basically making an appeal. You're trying to persuade someone to do the thing that you wanted to do, or think the thing you wanted to think, or say the things that you wanted to say, right? By appealing to their emotions, their logic, right? Whatever you think is going to work. And so you've got to make through that. You've got to work through that process, right? All right, so that's classical argument. We come to Rogerian argument, right? Rogerian argument was founded by Carl Rogers, okay, who was a behavioralist. I think that's right. There we go. In the 20th century. Okay. Rogerian argument works from a couple of different principles. Okay. It works from the idea of listening, with understanding first. Oops. Then accurately restating the other person's position before responding. Some people call this parroting, right? But it's a matter of saying, okay, so what I hear you saying is X, Y, and Z, right? So when you look at Rogerian argument, you want to summarize the point you're about to refute. So you want to say, supporters of this, let's say if you're talking about a bill that's in Congress or whatever, you would say supporters of this bill, right, make these arguments, right? And you would list those out, and then you would say, but here's why, right, these things don't work, right? And then you would refute that. It's called a turnabout paragraph, and that's how you work with Rogerian argument, is you restate the position of the opposing point of view, and then you give reasons why it doesn't work. You don't throw it out, baby in the bathwater, all at one time. You piecemeal it. You break it down. You say, I agree with this, however, I don't agree with this, and here's why, right? And so it allows for a much more nuanced conversation than classic argument will allow us to do. So it's able to do that, right? And it creates common ground with the reader, because you're creating, and that's the key. The key to Rogerian argument is you have to create common ground with the audience. Okay? That means you have to present something that is a shared understanding. So the only way to do that is if you say House Bill 291 has problems because of blah, 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 blah. What if I don't know what House Bill 291 says? You lose me as an audience, right? So you begin by stating, this is what House Bill 291, blah, 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 what it says, right? And then you begin to outline where the holes are in that process. That way you're creating a common understanding, a common ground with the audience to work through your argument, right? Without that, we're just kind of left with presumptions, right? And presumptive writers have very small audiences because they're writing to people who only know their writing or only know what they're talking about because they followed them. We have to be much more open than that, right? We have to be much more open to explaining things and outlining things so that people are on the same page that we're on when we begin. So in essence, if you're working with Rogerian argument, you're working from a position of being a teacher. You want a common ground, you want a common conversation to happen, and then you want to have that kind of rebuttal, and here's why it doesn't work, here's what does work, right? And work from that. Okay? This removes emotion from the argument. It's going to tell me to change this to must. There we go. We'll just change it to must. So this removes removes emotion from the argument. This is absolutely imperative, right? When you're working with academic argument, you have to be unemotional. You have to be detached from the emotionality of it. If anybody's ever said to you, you're too emotional, we need to talk about this later, that usually pisses you off, right? But there's a reason they're doing it, right? And it's because with that emotion in front of you, you can't see the logic. You can't see the way it has to go. That's why you should never write emails when you're mad or text messages or that kind of stuff. You should kind of walk away and kind of let it cool off for a bit, right? Go for a walk or whatever. I used, not a good plan, but when my former spouses or significant others and I would get into fights, I would go for a drive, or I would get on my bike and take a ride, right? Because it clears my head and it gives me time to cool off and think, right? And it removes me from the situation, right? And allows my logic to begin to kick in and start making the points that I need to make. I'm not saying get behind the wheel of a car when you're mad is a good plan. Not what I'm saying at all. That was probably not a good plan. But it was my way of escaping that. So that's the deal with Rogerian argument, right? Carl Rogers, he also had a thing that was called the universality of the specific. Okay? What this means is the more specific we are, the more people can relate to our content, our positions, or our arguments. Okay? This runs counter to what most people think. Most people think that if I speak in generalities, that I'm reaching more people. But in reality, we need to be much more specific, right? Think about the writers that you like the most. You think about the television personalities, or think about the people you watch on Twitch or what have you. Think about the artists that are out there in the world, right? The reason that you gravitate to them is because they are specific. And their experience speaks to your experience. If they're speaking in generalities of just general experiences, like if I say, man, lunchtime at school was a motherfucker, wasn't it? Right? What have I said that's there other than lunchtime, school, right? Those two things we can identify with. But if I start talking about square pizza, right? If I start talking about things that are like square pizza, little milk cartons, right? That you go to open the milk carton and it says peel it and then squeeze, and the motherfucker doesn't work. So you go to the other side and it's definitely not supposed to work because it's got too much glue on it. Now I'm being very specific, and more people can relate to that, right? And so that's what we have to do as writers, is we have to be much more specific about the things we're writing about the things we're talking about, so that people can either identify themselves or they can identify someone they know within the content that you're providing them, right? That's why I do story time, right? When I do story time with Puck and I tell stories, right? People like that and people gravitate to it because it's a very specific event. It's a very specific experience. And people are like, Jesus Christ, man, I know that person, I know a guy like that, or what have you. Or they've experienced something similar to it. And it kind of creates common ground. That's the idea behind Carl Rogers, is he said the very things that we don't want people to know about us, the things we think make us individuals, are the things that make us all human, right? So we all have those dark moments, we have those dark thoughts, right, in our head, and those things make us all human, right? And some of us let them out, right, and some of us don't, right? And I had a friend of mine when I was in graduate school. She's a very dear friend of mine, and she used to get mad at me when we were in graduate school. She'd get so mad at me in class, and then after class she would come to me and she'd say, "You can't say those things." And I'd say, apparently I can, because I just did. And she goes, "But you can't. You can't say those things in polite society." And after we became friends, she said, she goes, "I was always so mad at you because you were saying the things that I was thinking, but I was always raised not to say," right? And so she would get mad because I was doing the thing that she wanted to do, but she just her propriety, for lack of a better term, her propriety would get in the way of her being able to express herself effectively, right? And now she's much more like me. She's much more vocal about things, and you know, because she's kind of let go of some of that. But that's the thing, right? Is when I make dark jokes about something, people laugh and it makes them uncomfortable, but they're thinking the same things, right? They just can't, for whatever reason, they don't say it out loud, right? So that's what Rogerian Argument's all about. Carl Rogers said that those are the things that make us all the same, right? All right. So Tolman Argument, founded by Stephen Tolman, and he's a philosopher. It basically claims that all arguments share characteristics. Okay. They have claims. I fucking learned how to type. I'm telling you, I can't type today. They have claims. They have grounds, meaning they have a backing or support, right? They have what is called a warrant or a reason for them to exist. They have backing. They have an aspect of rebuttal that they can be argued or rebutted, and they have qualifiers. So qualifiers are terms by which the claim is true. So he uses them a bit differently than what compositionists define qualifiers as. Qualifiers are they basically provide the limits of our argument, which is kind of the same thing that he's saying, but it's a little clearer for me when we use the compositionist definition, that qualifiers provide the limits of our argument. So we say this is true, right, when these things happen. So he begins to use the same thing, right? So when you look at claims, there are three types of claims. My computer's telling me I have class in a few minutes. We have good Lord. We have claims of fact. We have claims of policy. And we have claims of value. Okay? Those are the things that we have, right? Grounds, these are just going to be why. We're going to look at why these things exist. Our warrant is mostly how. How do these conditions come about? Backing is going to be our support. Rebuttal goes back to that restatement, right? This is the rebuttal becomes become opposite opinions, right? So we begin to work through these things, right? So there's three different types of argument, right? These are the three most widely used type of argument. It depends on what you're using, what you're doing. So grounds, as far as Tolman goes, grounds would be assumptions. They would be things that we like things that we hold to be true. And so that's what that would be. As far as qualifiers go, what you're going to look at is you're going to say that these things are true given these certain parameters. Like, is water always wet? Right? There's an argument that can be made there, right? That water's not always wet. Okay? So one of the assumptions is that water's always a liquid, right? And we say that water is a liquid, right? But cease to become a water when we change it, when we freeze it and turn it to ice and make it a solid? The answer is no, right? The chemical composition has not changed, so there's an assumption there, right? And then, so how do we make water not wet? We freeze it, right? What's the support we have for it? Well, we can build an experiment for that, right? So we can build an experiment that says water's not always wet. We can freeze it. It becomes a solid, right? The opposite opinions is, I'm not sure there is a rebuttal for that. But without a rebuttal, right? We have an argument that is not really an argument, right? It becomes oversimplified, right? So I'm using a very simple example to show you that the qualifiers are the things that we say, okay, here are the terms by which this thing becomes true. Water is wet when it is above, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? But below 212 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So there's your qualifiers. It's the things, the parameters by which it makes it true. So that's the way it is with every argument, right? So according to physicists, like this wall behind me, right, has more open space in it than actual solid space. Okay, there's more space between the atoms, between the wall, right, than there are closed space. According to the laws of physics, right, I, as a human being, should be able to walk through that wall because there's more open space than filled space within a wall. We know that's not true, right? So within certain parameters, physics is correct, right? If you get to the atomic level, physics is absolutely correct. Once you get to the macro level of mass, right, it becomes untrue. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to kind of look at that. Okay, all right. So we're going to move on to rhetoric, right? Depends on speed, right? No, we should be able to, according to physics, right? According to strict physical rules, right, Pestemi, we should actually be able to walk through the wall and not hit anything. We should be able to just pass right through it. But we can't. We know we can't. So, because there is more space between the atoms of that wall than there are between the atoms of my body, so I should be able to pass right through it. But we can't. So, all right. So we're going to move on to rhetoric, right? Rhetoric is an old term. It's been around for a very long time. And composition and rhetoric used to be the same group of people, right? We used to be competent rhetoric people. So in the 1950s, right around 1955, we all had a great big argument about which was more important, the spoken word or the written word. We had a bunch of arguments, and they split. And so now when you go to college, you have to take composition classes and you have to take oral communication classes. But they all used to be the same discipline. So we would actually have students write papers, and then they would present those papers to the student body and to the faculty at the end of the semester, right? And that's what competent rhetoric was all about. It was about writing an argument, building an argument, and then presenting that argument to an audience, right? And then taking questions on your argument. So you were defending your rhetorical process and your argument throughout that. Now we separate those two things. And so you have a oral communications class, and then you have a composition class. But if you take in those two classes, we teach pretty much the same stuff. And it's because we come from the same discipline, right? It's all about communication, right? We just do things a little differently, right? So when you move into rhetoric, rhetoric is the process of recognizing and using the most effective strategies for influencing thought. Okay? So this is why we call people great statesmen, right? When we hear people, if you've ever listened to Bill Clinton give a speech, or John F. Kennedy, or Martin Luther King Jr., or Barack Obama, they are great speakers. They're great statesmen. Their concept and their understanding of rhetoric is impeccable. They know how to influence people's thoughts and emotions and whatnot. And then compare that to someone who's a poor speaker, like Donald Trump or George W. Bush. Even Ronald Reagan was a great orator, but he was trained as an actor, so he was good at kind of doing this process of rhetoric. And if you go back and you listen to presidents from up to 100 years ago, you hear a much different cadence to the way they speak. You hear much more of these rhetorical processes that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. You're going to hear much more of that in their speeches than we do today. FDR and the whole deal, the fireside chats and whatnot during the age of radio, that's where everybody was, right? During those times when those things aired, everybody, their entire family would sit and listen to those radio broadcasts. I don't think the same would happen today, right? But when we look at how to use rhetoric, all right, we have to know what is happening. We have to ask, why should someone speak out? Right? We have to know who is present. Who's our audience? We have to say, what are the audience's values and beliefs? Okay, this is important to look at because if you're trying to gather a larger audience, you don't want to alienate people, right? I'm sure I alienate people left and right when I broadcast via Twitch. Some people see me and go, nope. Other people see me and go, well, that looks intriguing, and they drop in, and then they hear something that we're talking about, and they may go, nope, or they may stick around, right? It all just depends. It depends on whether their values and beliefs kind of merge with those of the community or not. So we have to take those things in consideration when we're using rhetoric. We have to go, okay, so what are the values and beliefs of our audience, right? And then we have to ask, what kind of language would best appeal to those beliefs? Okay, so this is the question that we're looking at, right? Is what kind of language, right, is going to best appeal, right? So if you're appealing to an academic audience, you don't want to use slang. You don't want to use curse words or profanity, right? If you're writing something that's to a less academic purpose, then you may want to use those things. It depends on who your audience is, who you're trying to reach, what's your purpose, right? All of those questions need to be answered, and then you begin to use rhetoric, because you're looking at strategies that most effectively influence the way people think and kind of their engagement with your content, right? Oops, I needed to go back. Let me do this. I just need to push that back. Queen Elizabeth does it well. Yes. To gain proficiency in rhetoric, we have to answer some questions. We have to understand what is the relationship between language and thought. Okay? What's the difference? What's the relationship between them, right? Are they the same? Are language and thought the same? Or are they separate from one another, right? We have to understand that everything that we think sometimes doesn't need to be vocalized, right? We have to learn to censor ourselves, right? Especially in certain company, in certain audiences, you don't want to say certain things because you'll begin to alienate them. What's the difference between language and thought? Thought is kind of ephemeral, right? Thought is can be conceptual, right? Whereas language has to be much more concrete. We have to be clear. A thought can be ambiguous. We can have a thought that is not fully fledged, but if we're going to give it to language, if we're going to give language to it, we have to give it a complete kind of fleshing out. It has to be concrete and complete, and we have to think our way through it. So that's why writing is so important and drafting is so important, because we're working towards that process of thought to language and completeness, right? And making sure that we're explaining things in the way that the audience is going to relate to them most effectively. That's what rhetoric's all about. Okay, next one. A little tangy. How does a particular type of language influence consciousness? It's going to ask me to be less wordy there. Nope, not going to do it. We're just going to ignore you, because the question says exactly what I need it to say. All right. So how does a particular type of language influence consciousness, right? Does it make your readers stop and think about something else? Does it make them drift off of topic and think about something over here? Are they thinking about the thing that you asked them about? Does it make them pause and then come back, right? So that's what it means by just a particular type of language influence consciousness. We can ask questions in specific ways that make people react certain ways, right? That's why tests are all, like every exam you've ever taken has an implicit bias to it, because it's trying to affect you consciously so that you think in a specific way. And that's what rhetoric tries to do, is it tries to make sure that we think in a specific path. We want our audience to begin to think in specific terms. So when people come to me and they say, well, you're trying to teach my kid how to be a fucking communist, and I go, I can't make your kid read 3 pages of a book. I certainly can't get them to read a communist manifesto, right? I'm not here as a teacher to teach you what to think. I'm here to teach you how to think, right? Part of how to think is learning how to write effectively, right? And then by virtue of that, you get to choose your own topic, right? You get to write your own paper, and you get to try to influence someone else's thought, and you take what you've learned how to think and you get to try to make them think what you want them to think. That's what rhetoric is doing, right? It's moving, rhetoric moves us from the how to the what, okay? So, but we have to be much more specific when we do that, okay? The next one is, how do specific values, beliefs, or mores get dismissed? Oh, no. Mores stay in place. There we go. How do they stay in place over time, right? And then the next question is the opposite of that question. How do specific values, beliefs, and mores get dismissed over time? Good Lord. So there's 2 sides of the same question, right? Is how do specific values, mores, or beliefs stay in place, right? And how do others get dismissed, right? We need to understand rhetoric, because if we're trying to move people to a way of thinking, we may be moving them to a way of thinking that replaces an older way of thinking that's a value belief, or more, right? A more is kind of a morality or a moral paradigm that governs a culture, right? Your family has mores, right? That you have your own morals, you have your own kind of things, and society has theirs. So how do we move? How do we change? How do we get those things to kind of adapt over time? We have to understand how those things occur for us to be able to effectively move people in a specific direction, because people like to be frozen. They like to stay where they are. They don't like to think. They don't like to move. But we have to, as writers, as thinkers, as intellectuals, we have to be able to unfreeze people, move them, and then let them refreeze, right? And we have to know how far we can move them to let them refreeze, because if you try to move them too far, they throw that shit off, right? They snap right back. They rubber band. They're like fucking mobs in a video game. They chase you for a little while and then they leash back, right? Because you tried to move them too far. It's the same shit with humans. That's the way thought works, right? Is we leash back to wherever it is that we're kind of comfortable, right? So you can move people uncomfortable. You can make them uncomfortable for a little bit, move them in a specific direction, let them get comfortable there for a while, and then move them again. This is why we have to work through our legislators and things like that to make piecemeal reform within our laws. Because if we try to change a law whole piece, right, whole cloth, right, people will reject it. It'll never get passed, right? But if we piecemeal it, we can get it done much more rapidly, because then we're constantly just giving small changes, small changes, small changes. It's kind of like we treat people like lobsters or crabs in a fucking pot of water, right? If you toss a crab or a lobster in boiling water, they'll climb out of that pot, right? But if you put them in the water, put them on the stove and just let the water heat up gradually, they'll stay in there and they'll boil themselves to death and they'll never try to get out, right? Humans are kind of the same way. This is how they begin to take our rights from us, right? Is just a little bit of time. Like, wow, so when you come to the airport, we're going to make you take your shoes off, right? Because we want you to be safe. How does taking my shoes off make me safe? I take my shoes off all the time at home, and it doesn't make me any safer in my house. Because if a fire starts, I have to put my shoes on to fucking go back outside, right? You see, it counters logic, right? We're going to pat you down, right? We're going to violate your personal space. We're going to pat you down because we want you to be safe, right? Well, that's a violation of my civil liberties, right? Now we're going to put you through a machine that actually looks underneath your clothes. No, you're not. By the way, you have the right to refuse that, right? You have the right to refuse that. That is not something they can make you do. Now, if you do that, they're going to try and harass you into going through that machine, but you don't have to do it. You have the right to refuse it, and then what they have to do is they have to bring 2 TSA agents here in the States, bring 2 TSA agents who are the same gender as you, and one of them pats you down while the other one observes, okay? That's how that has to happen, okay? That's their policy. So if everyone refuses to go through that machine, it becomes untenable for them to maintain the machines, right? And we create more positions for jobs, right? Because now they have to pat everybody down, and one person has to observe, right? So that's one of the things that they do, is they try to slowly move you to a place where you just go, fuck it, it doesn't matter, right? It's at the point now where people don't know their rights anymore, right? Because they have just been told, do what you're told, do what you're told, do what you're told, right? Well, if a police officer pulls you over and says, do you know why I stopped you, right? If you say yes, they don't have to tell you why they stopped you. You've just had an admission of guilt. So you just go, no, I don't know why you stopped me, right? And then they have to tell you, right? That's your right. They have to tell you why you've been detained, right? But people will just go, yeah, I know why you stopped me. Right? Because they think it's going to get them out of a ticket. Well, if you're afraid of tickets, don't break the law. Don't speed. Don't run the red light. Don't whatever, right? And then you won't have to worry about it, right? But I won't give up my rights to save me $100. I won't. That's just a principle for me, right? So that's a value. That's something that I hold dear, right? So that's what we've got to look at, right? Is we have to know how those things get moved, right? Okay, so that's how we gain proficiency in rhetoric, right? We need to understand the relationship between language and thought. We need to understand how language influences consciousness, and then how do our values, beliefs, and mores stay in place, and how do they get dismissed over time, right? And then we move into this thing called exigency, right? Exigency is an occasion when something happens, or doesn't happen, that results in some uncertainty. Okay? Or that. Oh, I should have been there we go. So what we want it to do, right, when we look at exigency, right, what we're looking at is we're looking at things like lost car keys. We're looking at things like being left on red by someone. Oops. Good Lord. Right. So we have these type of things, right? So lost car keys, right? You don't know where your car keys are. There's some uncertainty there. So you start looking, right? You start retracing your steps because you're trying to logically recreate where you left your keys, right? So once I lost my car keys, my ex-wife was like, I was looking in the cabinets, I opened the freezer and I look in there and she goes, your keys aren't in the freezer. And I just closed the freezer and I said, do you know where my keys are? Because that would just be fucking mean, right? If you know where my keys are and you're not telling me, that's just really mean, right? And she goes, well, no, I don't know where they are. And I said, well, then don't presume to tell me where they're not, right? I was retracing my steps when I came in the house, right? And I went to the cabinet and got a glass and went to the freezer and got some ice. And so I was right? That's how we try to make sense of uncertainty, is we try to make sense of it. If you've ever seen a car accident, you immediately try to postulate what happened, what went wrong, right? If you've ever seen a semi-truck flipped over on the side of the road, that's some shit that's not supposed to happen. Those are the biggest vehicles on the highways, and they're not supposed to turn over, right? So you start putting together what happened. Did the driver fall asleep? Was there a big wind gust? Did something run out in front of it? Somebody slam on their brakes? Was a road right? You start trying to put together the pieces of that puzzle that make it make sense for you, right? Because that's what our brain likes to do, is it likes to make sense of puzzles, right? So this is the problem why if you've ever gone out somewhere, right, and your parents call your phone or they text you, and you don't answer it or you ignore their text, it's why they start blowing your phone up. Because at the moment that you don't respond normally, in your parents' brains, right, or if you're a parent talking to a child, in your brain, your child is both alive and dead at the same time, right? It becomes Schrodinger's child, right? And we cannot live with that level of uncertainty. That level of exigency will drive us absolutely insane. So we have to resolve that exigence process, that problem. We have to solve it. So that's why your parents start blowing your phone up, right? Or you start blowing your kid's phone up, or your significant other, or whomever. It's because in their brain, you're both alive and dead at the same time, and they have to solve that problem. That's what exigencies do to us, right? And that's why there's such a problem, right? That's why they have to be resolved, okay? So that's usually when we're trying to make an argument, where we're trying to make some type of Aristotelian argument, Tolmanian argument, Rogerian argument, or we're working from a position of rhetorical argument, what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve some exigence. We're trying to solve some problem that creates uncertainty within our society, within ourselves, within our family constructs, within our professions or what have you. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve those issues, right? So if you look at the COVID-19 thing right now, the exigency that we're trying to solve by the stay-at-home orders and all of that is we're trying to make sure that we don't have more uncertainty about who's infected, who's not infected, and the spread of this thing, right? Can we get it again? People don't even, there's some studies that say we can get it again. There's some studies that say we can't, right? We don't know. We don't know. Just because you've had it once doesn't mean that you're safe. Your body, you have antibodies, but that doesn't mean that you have enough to stave off the infection again, right? So, we used to think that you couldn't get chickenpox twice, but you can. We just call it, what's it called now? Is it called hives? Is that what it is? I think that's what it is. So, that's the issue with exigencies. We're trying to solve a problem, and these are the means by which we do it. Okay? So, the tenets of strong arguments, right? Shingles. Thank you. I get those two mixed up. Hives and shingles, I get screwed up all the time. Which one is hives? Is hives just an autonomic response like anxiety induced, or is it actually tied to another? Is it tied to another childhood disease or childhood illness? Shingles. Thank you, Amy. So, tenets of strong arguments, right? As I wait for that. So they should be revelatory rather than familiar. Okay? Highs is allergic reactions. Okay, that's thank you. That's why I'm not a doctor right there. That's why I go. Don't take medical advice from this kid, right? So strong arguments should be revelatory rather than familiar, right? That means they should teach us something. This is why I told all my students that you have to develop an argument that you don't know the answer to, right? That way you have a strong argument that is revelatory rather than familiar. If you already know the answer to your research question, there's no point in writing that paper. It's a waste of time. All you're doing is reinforcing. It's confirmation bias. It's not learning, right? Education and learning is supposed to be slow, painful, and revelatory, right? They should appeal to logic rather than emotions. They should focus on analysis rather than packaging. What's the content? Let me back up. So we want to worry about the content, right? Not the container, right? If you put really shitty food in a really pretty container, it's still shitty food, right? Container doesn't make it taste any better. So the goal within an argument is to focus on the content of that argument, not whether it's on pretty paper or it's it looks pretty or what have you. It really needs to be a solid argument. It needs to be based off analysis rather than packaging. We need to look at, okay, so how do we analyze it? If somebody says something's a good movie and you ask them why, and they start talking about the container of it all, right? You can have a movie that has lots of action and explosions, and it's very pornographic. It's very appealing to the eye, right? Appealing, but the dialogue is bad, right? I'm looking at you, Michael Bay films, right? Those kind of things, they're fun to watch, right? but they're all about packaging. There's really no substance to them whatsoever, right? And then when he tried to do that, when he tried to make a movie that had substance to it, he just got fucking destroyed, right? Because people are like, that's not a Michael Bay film, you know? We don't go to a Michael Bay film to be lectured to. You're right. You absolutely don't. You go to watch shit explode, right? Because he does it amazingly, right? So that's what we have to look at is, look at the package. Don't look at the packaging, and that's fine. But if you're gonna make an argument, right, you need to focus on analysis, right? How good are you at analyzing certain things, right? Find your strength, stick to it, right? And they should be inclusive rather than exclusive, right? The larger the audience, the better. Okay? So, that's what we've looked at. That's kind of the goal for today. I think I got through that in right about time. So, cool. So we've covered what is argument, what is an academic argument, right? The problem with people and opinions, right? We've gone through classical argument, Rogerian argument, Tolman Argument, and the tenets of rhetoric and how to use it, and how to gain proficiency in it. Exigencies and why they're important, and the tenets of strong arguments. What makes these arguments better than other arguments? So that's argument in a nutshell, right? And so at this point in time, this lecture is done. Cool.